The sign is in the way. Um, is it better if she sits here? They can't, some of them can't see you because of this sign. Well, we will have to, some of you will have to do what we did yesterday and look at Madhur on the screen. And has been on screen for all these years anyway.
I'm so short. I'm so sorry. Anyway, I apologize for being short.
Okay, let's start. As a novelist, I've always felt, all writers in every genre have a certain arrogance related to what they do, and I've always felt a novel is what allows people of another culture to enter into your own. But the older I grow, the more I feel, Madhur, that actually, when you want to learn something about another world, you read the cookbooks of that world. And in your case, over the last 50 years, you have, perhaps you are, if there were to be an ambassador of modern India to the world, that would be you, because you've shown hundreds of thousands of people what it means to be Indian. And it's my great pleasure to be with you today. So let's please have a round of applause for one of the... Well, I'm going to start a long time ago, Madhur, and I live in the same city that you grew up in, and they are very different Delhis. And the first thing I want to ask you on this journey into food and memory is, what do you see when you come to Delhi now, and what do you remember of Delhi then? Because you grew up in Old Delhi, isn't it? And that's what we learn in climbing the mango trees.
I think I see more things wrong with Delhi that after my sister always says, just stay here for a few weeks and you'll not notice anything. You won't notice the broken pavements. You won't notice the telegraph poles which are going at an angle. You'll just accept all this as you did before. And sure enough, within a few weeks, I don't look at all that. But I think my early memories are of a family, being inside four walls with a group of people, homogeneous kind of people, whom I felt loved me and cared for me, and belonging to this rather large, what we called a joint family, and being a part of it. And all my friends were my cousins. I didn't know too many other people other than school friends. But the best friends I had were my cousins. We would go fishing together, go to picnics together, and they became the closest people to me, and they still remain very close.
One of the most beautiful things in climbing the mango trees is that your family comes out as an example of India and Delhi's composite culture. The men of the family who have a life out in the world are often more anglicized and also Islamicized.
Right.
And the women of the family read the Ramayana and eat mostly vegetarian food. And the most amazing detail I found when I first read the book was that it took you a long time to realize that your mother was vegetarian.
Right. So, what happened was that the men of the family worked for the rulers. We came, I think, originally from a little royal family in Rajasthan, a tiny one, not worth much. And we came then to the Mughal, my ancestors. And it's funny how the histories go in various families. Our family history has one man after another man after another man. And you say, well, what happened to the women? What were the women doing? Nah, they don't care. So anyway, we have this family history of one man begetting another man and another man and another man. And so it goes. But all these men worked in the Mughal court, and they acquired the etiquette of the Mughal court. So first they spoke Farsi. Then they, as Urdu became the court language, they spoke Urdu. And the tehzeeb, the culture, was entirely Muslim for the men. So they did the adab, their way of eating, their way of talking was completely Muslim. Whereas the women were completely different. They read the Ramayana, the Gita every year. They spoke a kind of Hindustani, which had Urdu words and Hindi words. And the food they cooked was very Delhi Hindu food, actually. But for the men, they made all the meats. that the men would expect in the court, they made all those meats. Or shikar ka gosht hota tha, hunt. Anything from the hunt that was very popular. All the men would go hunting. And they would get the bater and battakh and all these, ducks and quail and all these things, pigeons. Not pigeons, partridges, not pigeons. And we would cook those in the house as well. So that was our kind of food. And it was a very unusual kind of mixture that I didn't even realize was unusual till I left that family and looked back on it. And this is what happens. I think Gandhi came from somewhere else. And then he got involved in India and could deal with India. I left India and went to America and then looked back on India and looked back on my childhood and was able to analyze it much better than what I could while I was living right inside this kind of setting.
As soon as one is transplanted to another world, as you were in your late teens, I think, when you went to the Royal Academy to study drama in England, as an immigrant, one immediately realizes one is poorer than everyone else, not just for reasons for material reasons. And you are separated from your food, and what happens to you then?
Well, this is the thing. When you are at home, at least there was enough food, there was enough everything, there was a shortage of nothing, and the food was delicious. You took it for granted, and it was cooked for you, so you did nothing. You sat at the table, wonderful food came, you ate it, and you were just grateful for it. And at weddings in particular, special caterers would come, and they would set up a tent, but they were catering for your community. They weren't catering just general Indian food. Each group of caterers was allied to a community. And so our community, we are castes, got a certain kind of food, and the caterers would come, and they would make it, and we would enjoy it very much. Now, all this vanished. So my father, I want to be an actress. My father's indulgent. He has 4 daughters, 2 sons. I'm the 5th. He doesn't really care. I'm an oddball anyway. So he lets me go. He said, "Acha jao." And he comes to Bombay with me, and he puts me on a plane, and off I go to England. Now, I get there. It's the late 1950s. There is smog, pea green smog that comes at 3 o'clock, and you can see nothing. All you see this green horribleness in the air. And the food is just awful. It's just after the war. There's nothing available. The best thing is fish and chips. And as for Indian food, there are just hardly no places. There are a couple of places in Leicester Square, a couple of other places on Regent Street, and that's it. And they're all terrible. Nobody gives you the kind of food that you got at home, that's for sure. So then, I remember I was at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art studying how to act. And we would go 5 flights up to the top floor where the canteen was. And they would give us these see-through slices of roast beef, which were gray, and then potatoes that had been cooked for, seemed like days, watery mess, cabbage that had been cooked for days, another watery mess. And there I would sit dreaming of hing zire ke aloo and bhara hua karela, all these things, and these were far away. So I started writing letters to my mother and saying, "Please teach me how to cook something." So the first recipes I asked for, one was hing zire ke aloo, one was a gobi aloo, and one was khade masale ka gosht, which seemed to me simple enough. And my mother sent these recipes, and I was staying with a family in digs, as they say, and they let me use the kitchen. So I started cooking there, and I was cooking for myself. I would give some to my landlords if they wanted it, but basically I was cooking for myself just to get decent food. I didn't know how to make rotis, chapatis, pulkas, anything like that. So I would go to the Jewish market and get pumpernickel bread and eat my hing zire ke aloo with pumpernickel bread. And that's the best I could do, and it tasted like heaven. It tasted absolutely wonderful. And I was always cold, so I would sit before the gas fire right up close, eating my hingzire ke aloo with pumpernickel bread. And that's the first thing I ever cooked and made for myself.
This brings me to the question I've always longed to ask you for 15 years, and now I finally have the chance, which is that it's strange now in India, there's lots of online talk about food, and you routinely discover people calling themselves foodies. And it turns out that what they mean by that is they love eating, but that is something that we all share in common as a tribe.
Yeah.
What does one learn about food when one starts for the first time to cook it before one eats it?
Ask me again.
What does one learn about food when one cooks it rather than when one has merely eaten it all one's life? That when you put it together for yourself, what does that do to the taste of food?
I think it teaches you that you can change it, the taste, by adding a little more of this, a little more of that, that you're in total control, and that you can lead it in any direction, this way, that way, little more of this, little more of that, and you get a different feeling from the food. So you become like a magician, you become like a master, and you know that you can make it what you want it to be, and if a friend is coming who likes this, you try and please them and put that in it, or somebody else is coming, if a child is coming, you put no chilies in it. So you learn the art of using your masalas as wisely as most Indians do. I keep saying in my books that Indians are magicians with spices. They get 10 flavors out of one seed, like cumin seeds. We can get 10 flavors out of it, and you all know that. But I discovered it, and then I write about it for people who don't know anything about Indian food, that this is what you can do by just changing a little bit of that, changing a little bit of that. These light maneuvers, very small movements within the sphere of seasonings and spices makes all the difference. And starting to cook yourself, especially Indian food, then you know how you can become a master of that.
Soon after you left for America, and this is where your career as an actress began, and since you described for us what it was like, what the food markets of England were like, what was it like in New York? I believe in those days what we know as dhania was called Chinese parsley.
Yeah, the names kept changing. It was called dhania, hara dhania, was called Chinese parsley. It also had its Mexican name, which was cilantro. So you had to struggle between names and see which name most people wanted and understood. So, I mean, I learned to do that because I wrote cookbooks not just for America, I wrote them for England too. And here it was not called, it was called green coriander in England. So you switched, I learned to switch very fast for different vegetables, zucchini, courgette. I could do it at the, anyone would do that if they are in a country and they want people to understand what they're saying, aubergine to eggplant. You just learn how to do it very fast when you're speaking to different groups of people. And that's just a way of communicating, that's all.
What is the time for you when your journey into food also translates over into language and you begin to write up what you know? Because most cooks live within a zone where they talk about food, but what were the opportunities that made you become a food writer?
Well, I didn't, the history of my writing about food is rather odd. So I studied to be an actress. And when I was at RADA, they taught me how to speak English the English way. So we learned how to say how, now, brown, cow. So I came to America as an Indian, looking like an Indian, but not like most Indians expect an Indian to look. So I was a sort of odd person. But I was speaking like how, now, brown cow. So nobody wanted to hire me because they wanted an Indian accent whenever they wanted an Indian. And I didn't look like most Indians to them. So I would never get hired. And I wouldn't get acting work either in America. So what was I going to do? So, okay, I did my BA from Miranda House. Studied English, literature, and I could just about write. So what I did was I started writing to make money for newspapers and magazines. And I wrote about subjects that I knew something about. I knew something about dance because I danced. I knew something about art and architecture because I was terribly interested in all the visual arts. So I wrote about Khajuraho, I wrote about Konarak, and so it went. And then one day, one editor said, would you write an article about the foods you ate in India as a child? So I said, okay, that's very easy. So I wrote an article for a magazine called Holiday about what I ate as a child. And that article somehow hijacked me into the world of food. And I don't know what the process was, what happened, but I was first approached by a freelance editor. And he said, there are no good Indian cookbooks around. Would you like to write one? I said, sure. I didn't know anything at that time about writing a book. And I started putting a book together, but he vanished from the horizon. A publisher appeared, and after a while, the publisher broke up into 2 or 3 parts, and they vanished. And suddenly this written book was around. I had it, and I had written it without thinking about style, or I knew nothing. I just started writing it. And I wrote as it came to me. As I was, whatever my thoughts were, I just put them down. I just felt that I should credit the person who was giving me the recipe. It usually wasn't me, it was somebody else, an aunt, an uncle, whatever, a bhabhi, somebody. So I put it down that way. There were only recipes from Delhi and around Delhi. I had one bhabhi that was from Bengal, so I had a few Bengali dishes. I had one brother-in-law that was from the Punjab, so I had some Punjabi dishes. And Delhi had already become a Punjabi culture because of the partition and the amount of Punjabis coming into Delhi. So I wrote a little bit about that. But I really wrote about just without thinking. Everything came out as my mind was telling it to come out. You know, it wasn't planned, it wasn't styled, I didn't think of beautiful sentences. I just wrote it. And I didn't know where to sell it, so one of my friends, a writer friend called Ved Mehta, he suggested another friend of his at Pantheon, and he said, give it to my friend at Pantheon and let him see where it should go. So this editor at Pantheon looked at it and he said, send it to Judith Jones. Now, Judith Jones, I didn't know who she was. She was the best editor. She did all kinds of books, but she also did the best cookbooks at Knopf. So I sent it to her, and she bought it overnight. She just said, I want it. They didn't pay me anything. It's like writing for the Times. If you're writing for the Times, you don't need money. You're writing for the Times. So it was like that. You're writing for Knopf. You don't need money. You have all the prestige of writing for Knopf. So here's $1,000. Here you go. So there wasn't money in it. But it was the prestige of writing a book edited by Judith Jones and for Knopf. So that's how I started in the business.
When you say someone is the best editor of cookbooks in the profession, is there something specific to the editing of cookbooks that is different from editing other kinds of manuscripts? What does the editor bring to...
Well, at that time, there was. Because I understood, to a degree, what was required. I had to explain Indian food to Americans and the English, because the next few books I did were for England. And I had to explain it to them. But my editor, Judith Jones, said things like, give them menus. Tell them what to eat with what, because they won't know how to put it together. So I did that. I did follow her advice then, and to a degree, I've followed it ever since. But I wouldn't have thought about it at all, but I did do that because she asked for it. But otherwise, the book stayed pretty much the way I wrote it.
All these years, it sounds to me from what you just said that you've suddenly discovered that food is a way of reaching out not just to people in America, but also to people in your past who I assume were very gratified when they suddenly got the letter from you saying, can you please tell me what the recipe is for that dish that I remember? It's wonderful when someone writes you saying, we ate at your house and we remember the food you ate. Who, in these years, who are you cooking for in America? Who are the people coming to your house for dinner?
I'm getting old, so I'm cooking a little less than I used to cook. I used to cook frenetically, have parties all the time because and then my husband would say, "Why don't you just make roast chicken?" I said, "No, they'll be so disappointed. They don't come to your house for roast chicken. They want something Indian." And so I would go through the whole routine of making a proper Indian meal. And what is a proper Indian meal? There's meat, there's fish, there's 3 vegetables, there's dal, there's a first course, there's dessert. So I would kill myself. I'd be exhausted. I couldn't eat my own food after the meal. I would have to wait a day and eat it the next day because I was so exhausted. But I still do that. I'm still make a meal for other people and hope they enjoy themselves. And I'm left exhausted always.
What would happen conversely when people invited you to dinner, knowing that now you are the writer of a very famous
They
cookbook?
don't invite me. So I keep telling people, and I am telling you, please invite me. Because people just don't do that. They are too afraid to invite me. I said, why? You must make something so different from mine. I'm so bored with my own food. Can I not have your food? But they just are too afraid to invite me, and I'm so disappointed. So any of you who are willing, I say, invite me, please. Okay, you're on.
I don't
Okay.
think there will be any shortage. Madhur, how long are you in Delhi for?
I'm here till the 28th. So you have a few more days.
Okay, a big figure in your life, in your cinematic life at this time, but you also had a food range of his own as Ismail Merchant.
Right.
And it appears from reading, I have his book of, I recently bought the cookbook that he himself published. It's full of recipes you can make very fast. But it's clear that there's a real passion for cooking there and also a very sharp awareness of food as a kind of currency. A way of earning goodwill and a way of making people happy and sometimes, making people who are angry with you. To mollify people who are angry with you. I want you to talk a little bit about food and emotion and hospitality.
Or food in Ismail Merchant.
Yes.
Okay,
please,
I can do food in Ismail Merchant. Now, Ismail, for those of you who didn't know him, was a saudagar. He was a merchant. He has been raised as a merchant. And you could see that in everything that he did in his life. He was adorable, absolutely adorable. I'll do anything for you. And you felt, oh my God, he's a sweetheart. And he would do anything for you, but always he would demand something back which you didn't know. And he was a saudagar, as I said, so you would have to give him back something in return. And he would say, come to dinner as a payment for something or the other that you did for free for him. So you would get to his house, and there he would be flapping around in his slippers and saying, I'll be just back, I'll be back. I just have to get a few things. He had shopped for nothing. Nothing was at all ready. He would run out while he would say, just cut some onions for me over here. Just do this, and I'll be right back. I'll be right back. And then he would run out, and he would do the shopping, and then he would come back, and you had already started cutting and chopping for him. And then he would come, and he would make the food in 10 minutes. And somehow, what he had a sense of taste. He could आधा पका हो, पूरा पका हो, fully cooked or half cooked, it would taste good because he had that palate. He had a good palate. And he always could taste the goodness in food. And he could always somehow put it in. He had no techniques, really. He didn't know how proper rice would come together. Sometimes it was fully cooked, sometimes it was not. But he could bring the taste and the flavor to food and his saudagiri. He could bring his merchant quality that he was appeasing you for something horrible that he'd done a little earlier.
You just described beef. I think it's the first time I ever heard a piece of beef described in England as see-through. Did Ismail know that you were able to see through his methods? And did you ever have a chat about that?
I think he always knew. He always knew. He was smart enough to know and smart enough not to say anything. Because then, pol nahi khulni chahiye.
Yes.
Let's keep it all silent. And somehow we can continue this relationship of make-believe. And somehow we did keep it silent.
There are some things in every relationship one must not say, isn't it?
That's
You just
right.
enough to just know it on both sides. What was the food? I'm curious to know. I know some people who are actors and they always look forward to the meals. And it's the one time when everyone comes together. On the set of Shakespeare Wala in the 1960s, what were people eating? And did anybody have any particular demands? Did you, as the heroine of the film, were you able to say, I need something just for myself?
People asked me very often later on, especially when I was filming in England, will you cook? I said, no, I am here as an actress. And you cook, I will eat, but I'm here in my capacity as an actress because I didn't want the two, I don't know. It was such a hard thing to be known as an actress after a certain time when my cookbooks became very known. Somehow everyone thought of me as a chef and a cook. I'm not a chef, I'm a just cook. And they thought of me as a cook and not as an actress. So I made a particular point on sets to say, I'm not cooking, you're cooking. I remember we were doing a film in Wales, and I was asked if I would cook. I said, no, you cook. So the person I spoke to, happened to be Scottish. So they threw this marvelous all Scottish dinner where whiskey was served with every course, and we had haggis and all the rest of it. It was wonderful, and I was so happy to have it. I wouldn't have had it otherwise. It was the best quality of Scottish food that you could get. Cockaliki soup, haggis, and whiskey, 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 all the way through, and I'm a whiskey drinker, so.
Now that you're at this stage of your life, wherever you go, you're seen, as you say, as an ambassador for Indian food. What is it? Is there something about Indian food that is not written up in recipe books? To what extent is our culture divided from other eating cultures because we eat primarily with our hands? And what do you do in cookbooks to show people that, or perhaps hide it from them?
I remember when I was in Korea, and you know, in Korea they have these chopsticks which are like metal knitting needles. They're very thin and metal. So this woman was there and complaining. She had invited me to dinner, but then she was complaining about Indian food. And she was saying, I don't like the way Indians eat with their hands. So I said to her, can you make love with metal chopsticks? And that sort of stopped her right there.
That's very well said. But have you found that come across in other places? For instance, I don't know exactly when you get to having your own cookery show on TV. I imagine that's a coming together where your life as an actress is now suddenly you're facing a camera in another role. And what do you do to show?
I'll tell you the story about my cooking for the BBC for the first time. So I had written, I think, 2 cookbooks by that time. My first book, An Invitation to Indian Cooking, and my second book, which was an Asian vegetarian book. Now, I have to tell you this. American publishers, including Judith Jones, had this prejudice that Asians, like me, Asians, could only write Asian cookbooks. I may have been to Italy 50 times, but I couldn't write anything about Italy. I had to write about Asia, whereas an American could go to India once and write about Indian food. That was okay. But an Asian, an Indian, could only write about. So I was not allowed in my books to include Europe in any way. So I had not done anything on Europe or in Europe. And I was sitting at home and I got a call from the BBC who've already seen my first 2 books. And they said they were looking for someone to do an educational type of program for the BBC to teach them about these hordes of Indians and Pakistanis who are filling their land and who were causing all kinds of trouble for them. And they wanted to explain their culture to the English. Who are these people? What are they? What do they eat? So it was an educational program that they had in mind, and they had tried to find other people and had not found them. So they thought they would try me. And they said, if you are passing through England, this is a phrase I know very well. Who passes through England? You have to go there. So he said, if you're passing through England, can you stop and do an audition for us? So I waited for the day I was passing through on my way to India. And they took me to a radio studio This was not a studio with a cooking place or anything. It was a radio studio counter. And they said, put some pots and pans on it that you need and pretend that you're making something. Something simple. I said, okay, I'll make cucumber raita. Usme, there's very little cooking. All you have to do is bhuno the jeera, as far as I'm concerned. So, being an actress, I could do that. I was just pretending to do everything. So I put the cumin seeds in the little frying pan, and I was stirring them. I said, smells so nice. Now it smells roasted. Okay, now I'm going to grind them. So I pretended to grind them. Then I said, okay, now this is the dahi, the yogurt. I'm going to beat it first. I'm putting salt, pepper, some of the roasted cumin. See, here I am, putting it, mixing it in, putting a little red chili powder. And now I'm grating some cucumber. And I'm going to put the cucumber in and stirring it. Yum, doesn't it taste good? So I just pretended to do all that. And they hired me. And I became this voice of the Indian cooking. And they expected to do not very well at all with the book because it was an educational program. But in the first week, they sold 30,000 books. So then they realized that they had something else on their hands, something that England was ready for, was yearning for. And a lot of the Indians came up to me and said something quite interesting and something I did not expect to hear. They said, we did not expect to find an Indian like you on our television. Now, I think what they were saying is maybe an educated Indian or an Indian that can talk, an Indian that can express herself, himself. I don't know what they meant. But in any case, I was very happy that they were happy. And so, of course, then I did several programs for the BBC. But that was the genesis of it all.
If I were to hazard a guess, I would think they probably felt very proud that here was someone utterly at ease and without any sense, utterly composed in presenting a foreign
cuisine.
Right,
and not afraid to be Indian, because yes. I think Indians were treated very badly. And soon after that, everyone was called a Paki, and there was all kinds of bad names that we were called. So just to have somebody there who could speak and express themselves openly and honestly must have been a good thing or something.
I'm guessing perhaps this was the first time for you that you're in front of a camera, but you're not playing a role, you're playing yourself. And what does one bring to that persona that works well for television? Do you find that there's some notes of your personality that
I think it's just being honest and being yourself. That's it. And I think that you learn as an actress is to be calm, speak from the diaphragm, and speak the truth. I think that's what you learn from being an actress. And that's what you then present to the audience.
I'm curious to know, how does one do retakes on a cookery show? When you've just gone through something, but somebody says, well, that didn't come out right. Do you start all over again?
Yeah, they have several things ready at different stages. They'll have a second set of rice ready. They'll have a second set of whatever you're making. Some things will be pre-cooked, and you can go from one stage to another stage, from a first stage of putting meat in to brown it, to a second stage where it's already browned, and you're saving time to not show the whole process of making it. Sometimes they would just stop and wait till it was browned and then continue, but they would not show the cut part then.
At this stage, I'm imagining your books are written primarily for the home, and you look at the measurements, they're made for groups of 5 or 6 people. Does that mean that those recipes would not translate into a restaurant situation? I imagine there are lots of restaurateurs, and there still are in England today, who look to cookbooks to remind themselves of what they can put on the table there.
Well, I'm not good at cooking for, I think 30 people is the most I've cooked for, and I just don't enjoy it. My maximum is really 17 to 20, but I like cooking for 8 to 10. That's my favorite number. I like cooking for small groups, then I can pour my heart into it and make everything as fine as I can. If it becomes bigger, you go into a logistics world that I have not mastered. Other people can do it very well, but I'm not a master of it at all.
All these years, I'm imagining you make 1 or 2 trips back home to India, where Even perhaps your father looks at you with different eyes now that you're one of the best-known Indians in the world. And what is happening to the joint family that you left behind? Is it breaking up, and is the cooking changing as a result?
It's completely broken up. And my father never quite understood what I did. He thought, हाँ हमारी बच्ची actress है, उसकी hobby है, उसकी ये तो hobby है उसकी. And he said that till the end. It's a hobby.
And the world of food in your house?
मजाक था बिल्कुल.
Really?
Okay, what does she know about food? I was the least likely to cook out of anyone in my entire joint family. And there I was cooking. So it was not expected of me at all.
One of the things I like most about climbing the mango trees is usually in a food book, it's a record of the sensual experience of eating, and food is almost always connected to pleasure and not to pain. But in that book, there are some scenes where, for instance, there's a character called Shibu Dada, and who is meant to marry someone he doesn't really want to. And he ends up in this joint family being nice to everybody but his own wife and children,
Right.
who as a result are very miserable. And there's that wonderful scene when you find his wife scuttling into the kitchen when no one is looking to take out the best cuts of meat to give to her own children. And it's someone for whom food has, in a way, turned bitter, isn't it?
Right. You know, food can be used in so many different ways. It can be weaponized very easily. And I do tell the story about an uncle, my father's older brother, he was such a talented man. He was interested in music. He was a patron of all the great classical Indian vocalists and instrumentalist musicians in India at that time. And they all came and played in the house. So we were raised in this house full of music and good food. And he was the patron of it all. And he was loved by the whole city, by the whole family. His sisters adored him. My father adored him. And yet, he used to pick. And he picked two people that he liked. Everyone else, dismiss, 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 dismiss. And he picked one of my brothers. He liked the way one brother and one sister looked. And we were 6 children. He didn't pick his own children. He hated his children. He hated his wife. It was a second wife. He hated them, treated them like dirt, and like my brother and sister. He treated me like dirt. And somehow, it left that bitter taste because it was so connected to food. For example, he would come to the dining room, and he said, "Ab hum ईरान से भरी हुई dates लाए हैं, इसमें बादाम हैं, किशमिश है, walnuts हैं, ये सबसे अच्छी Irani मिठाई है एक तरह से." So everyone he would offer and sort of skip people he didn't like. And you felt so small and alienated, and it was horrible. And he did this in every kind of way. And much later on, when all of us cousins were talking and I was collecting pictures to write my book, collecting photographs, a cousin of mine said, "But he did this to me too." And somebody else said he did it to me too. So we realized that if we talked to each other, we might have had some kind of majority there.
Yes.
But we never did. We all felt we are the only ones that are being treated like this. So there was kind of a bitterness in the food as well for us. So, and then his wife, who obviously felt that her children were being totally slighted by the father, would go into the kitchen and get the choice parts of the meat and take them out before it came to the table, and then offer it to her children, just give it to her children. And so we would look and say, "Well, why?" I would ask my mother, "Why are we not getting that?" And my mother would say, "You just hush up, hush up." So it was a whole world. So the joint family had its good parts, and it had its bad parts, and the bitterness and the sweetness somehow of it came in the form of food.
Even for those who really love cooking, food can turn bitter in that you are then expected for 3 times a day to rustle something up and bring it to the table, and everybody else grows lazy around you. And imagine in the 60 or 70 years that you've been observing the world of Indian food, there's been a dramatic recasting of the gender roles in Indian cooking. Do you feel this is a place where we're making progress as a country? When you come back now, are there more men cooking, or do they still sit around somewhere else and wait for food to arrive?
Men cooking is nominal. They do it when they choose to do it. A woman has to do it. A woman has no choice. A man retains his choice. I'm doing it, I'm not doing it. I think that is the difference. And when you have to do it, it is chore, necessity, love, all of that together. And I think the roles are not the same, exactly, whatever you might say.
So in a way, perhaps you are suggesting that one of the things we should do from now on is bring our children up, both boys and girls, exactly the same way to learn how to work in the kitchen.
I see my daughter, she's trying to do that. She has a boy and a girl. She's trying to do that. It's not taking.
It's not? I personally even find cooking with someone you love adds another dimension to the relationship because you cook for each other then.
Right, right. I mean, my husband and I,
Yes.
we do cook for each other all the time. But he'll do it to help. But I think deep inside, a man still doesn't believe that it's his job. We are raised to think it's our job to do it, and they are not raised to think it's their job. If they're doing it, they say, I'm doing it, I'm a good guy. And it's fine, it's fine. But I think the day when men think it's their equal responsibility has not come, in my mind. What do you think? Yeah, see?
Good. These are very necessary conversations. Is there a difference for you in your own life between eating with people and eating alone? Are there times when you insist on eating alone?
No, I'd rather eat with my husband. We are the two of us there, and we eat alone. But there are things that he likes and things I like. So we tend to have our own breakfast. Mine is quite Spartan. His is quite lavish. I can't eat that kind of food early in the morning. His lunches tend to be more lavish, or he likes certain things like peanut butter, and I don't. So we like different things. So we stay separated for breakfast and lunch and have our own. Dinner, we get together and eat the same thing.
Most of the time, especially in India, when you go to a restaurant to eat, all the people who cook food are men, but they do it professionally. Do you imagine, I assume you met dozens and dozens of Indian chefs on your food, in your food career. Do you think these people cook for their wives and children as well when they go home?
Sorry, who does?
Do you think Indian chefs also cook the same way when they go home, or do they expect?
No.
They don't?
They're cooking for money. They're chefs cooking for money. Wives cook for no money. So that's the main difference. The men will do it as a profession, and the women do it because they have to.
On the subject of restaurants, though, is there any particular restaurant you remember that stands out for you as the place where you didn't just eat wonderful meals, but it was a place you always felt was a very vivid experience of eating and of companionship?
We don't go out to restaurants, my husband and I, because we feel whatever it is, we can do it better ourselves.
Okay, we have 15 minutes left, so I think there's lots of people who want to ask questions. And Madhur, do you want to just choose them yourself?
The people? No.
Yes.
No.
Well, how about we start with that lady there in the red? Yes, you, ma'am. And then we go to someone else.
First of all, I'm a huge fan of your cookbooks. World Vegetarian has been kind of read to pieces in my house. My son reads it as a hobby, leafing through the pages. But what I wanted to ask was, is there a sequel coming up to Climbing the Mango Trees? Because it ends at a certain point, and there's so much more. Like today, so many stories that you've told which aren't there.
No, there is no sequel. I think what happened was I never did want to write a memoir. And editors were asking me for many, many years to write one. And I finally said, okay, I'll write one if I can only go up to the age of 18. because my life is a complicated life, and as I was saying the other day, as it is now, my children used to say when I gave a lot of interviews as an actress and a writer, and the children would somehow come into it, and they would always say, leave us out. We are not your life. We are different. Leave us out of your interviews. So I thought, how can I put them in a book? They'll be so angry with me, and I'd rather not go into that and go into deal with all that, because they would be unhappy, and I don't want to do it for that reason. So, no more. This is it.
You, ma'am. Yes.
Hello. So wonderful to see you here, Madhur ma'am. Been such a big fan.
Where is
You know, in World Vegetarian, there are little anecdotes that you have presented with your recipes, and I've always wondered, is it the connection that you're trying to establish with your reader by putting those anecdotes out there, or did you have a connection with those people whose recipes you put out there? So, you know, which is it, or is it both?
What was the first part? What was the first part of your question?
Is it the connection by putting those little anecdotes with the recipes? Is that your way of establishing a connection with your reader, with the reader of that book?
Partly that, and partly is to give credit to the person who gave me the recipe. Because I feel these are not my recipes, they're somebody else's. I often say the name of the person whose recipe it is, and then I tell a little story about that recipe, hopefully to tell the reader a few things that they might like to know, and let the author of the recipe, because they offer me handwritten recipes. I never take them. Because, you know, when people offer you a handwritten recipe, they actually don't know how to write a recipe. And they leave things out. They say words for a dal that I don't recognize. I don't know what it is. They never tell you how to cut the meat or the vegetable, what size. You don't know what the flame is. You don't know if it's high or it's low, and how long they cook it before it's the right color or whatever. So I want to watch them cook it. And then I see the flame, I see how they cut the vegetable, and I put all that down because I don't want my reader to make it wrong. I want the reader to get it right. That's my desperate desire, is the reader who is going to cook it must get it right. So I also like to acknowledge the author of that recipe, the maker of that recipe, and that is the reason for the head notes, which I like to give. Yes.
Okay. What about you, ma'am, and then you after that?
It's lovely to see you. Are there any
Where's
Are there any recipes at this
Oh,
point that you wish you had gotten, that you've missed out from friends or family?
There probably are, but I don't cry over them. I'll get them another time, or I won't get them. But so far, everything that I've got is something I have loved, and that's why it's in the books.
Why don't we get to that question then? Yes.
I want to personally thank you. When our daughter was a very young, grade one, the first book that she read cover to cover was your Seasons of Splendor.
Oh, yeah.
Can you please tell us a little bit about how that came to be?
Well, Seasons of Splendor is a children's book. And, you know, every family in India has the stories that they tell at the various festivals. And they're different stories. Holi ki kahani, Diwali ki kahani, all these festivals bring stories. At least in my family, we were great storytellers. We were known as storytellers. And what they would do with the story, or whether it was Diwali or Holi, they would tell the story that North Indian families of our kind of ilk told at that particular time. The older women would tell the story, but then they would add sort of a local foodie kind of addition would come in. फिर उन्होंने ये राजा जी आए, उन्होंने कहा हम तो बड़ा दावत करेंगे, उन्होंने कहा हमारे लिए ऐसा पुलाव बनाओ जो किसी ने नहीं खाया. Now pulaus and things are not in these tales. They are about people dying and living and a sister and a brother. They're not in the stories. But we put it in because it was just embellishing the stories with our own caste ethic for telling stories. So it became very peculiar to us people. So I went to all my aunts who were in their 80s before they died, and I recorded them telling these stories because they are the ones, my mother, my aunts, they are the ones who told these stories. So I recorded them, the stories the way they told them, and I did a book about the stories for the West. And I told the children at the end of the book how to pronounce each god's name, like Parvati. I sort of explained phonetically how to say it. Every name was explained at the back of the book, so parents could read the stories, or the kids themselves could read the stories themselves and look at the back and learn how to pronounce them. So it's a book that has done very well. It's called Seasons of Splendor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madhur, for that really interesting and so beautifully enriched with little jewels of your past coming out in this talk. It's really been exciting and interesting. I also want to personally thank you for having turned me into a fairly good cook. Like you said, that each time it has to be perfect, and each time I've tried your recipes, they've come out perfect.
Well, thank you.
My question, though, is that the book that really inspired me to try something other than Indian cooking with variation was cooking for friends and family. But as Indian cookery writers go, is there an acceptance for them to be cooking and writing books about non-Indian or non-Asian foods now, as it wasn't earlier?
Is there more room now for an Indian cookbook writer to write about the cuisines of the world?
Well, if he or she wants it published, they should check with the publisher because I don't really know. I know in America there would not be a great desire for an Indian to write about Polish food or Italian food. I don't think you could sell that book very easily. But there may be in this country. I'm not sure. Now, I'd like to say something myself.
Yes.
This whole thing has been about me. I'd like to talk a little bit about you.
No. Madhur, we only have 6 minutes left, and there's so many people still have questions to ask you.
Okay, at the end.
Yes.
Give me 2 minutes. Okay.
Someone at the back there. We would hate to disappoint all these folk.
Okay.
Yes, you, sir.
Thank you, Madhur. I just want to ask about Far Eastern cooking, your book on Far Eastern cookery. I was charmed by the fact that you explained each of the spices. And maybe you could tell us how important was it in whatever you write to explain where the spices come from and what the impact is, and if you overuse a particular spice, what happens with that and so on. Because I thought the detail on that really informed the way one cooked well. Thank you.
Well, it's important to me. I feel I'm, in a way, a teacher. I'm explaining things so that you make it perfectly. I want you to understand as much of it as I understood, so you make it at least as well as I do. I think this zealous kind of, or zeal, you might say, that I want people to cook. They always say to me, don't you leave something out? You don't want people to cook as well as you do. I said, never, never. That is as far from my way of thinking as I go. I want to make them to make it as well, if not better, than I can ever make it. You know, you go to certain places and, okay, I'll say it, Hyderabad for one place, where they will not tell you everything in a dish. They'll leave something out, because their dishes are famous, only they know it, and they say, hum kitab hum hi likhenge. So fine, but I know they're not going to write it. So they won't tell you everything. So I was collecting a recipe for sesame chutney from Hyderabad. So I found a secret way of doing it. I would ask 10, 12 people the same recipe. Each would leave something out. But by the time I got the whole recipe, I figured out what the total recipe was. And so I got my recipe anyway.
Okay, last question. What about you, ma'am? Sorry if I miss out some people at the back, but Madhur is signing books afterwards.
Well, I'm English, and I feel that I should stand up and represent England. Nobody else has done it. And I do remember when you first came onto English television, and what a wonderful, wonderful revelation it was to us all. And of course, we all have your cookbooks. And I sat here smiling to myself when you spoke about people don't tell you how to lower and raise a light, because when my son went off to university, he wanted some recipes. And I heard him say to his sister, do you know, she said, raise the light a little bit here, lower it here. And he said, what on earth? He was highly amused by it until he started to follow the recipes. And then he came and said, Mum, that was so helpful. And so I think, like you, I am a teacher. And the other thing is, I think the greatest compliment I can give to you is that you are a cook and not a chef. And like our English Delia Smith, she also is a cook. And for most of us, a cook is what we need. And like her, all your recipes do work out perfectly, totally reliable. And thank you, and it's been wonderful hearing you. It's been absolutely marvelous.
Thank you very much.
Madhur, you have the 2 minutes that you...
Okay, so now I just wanted to say about Chandrahas, just a few words. So this morning, we had wanted his book, and we were going to buy it and give him his 16 cents worth or 10 cents worth of royalties with it, which most authors want. But he said, no, I'll give you the book. And this morning we were sitting at breakfast, and he put the book down. Now, I happened to finish breakfast before my husband, so I started reading it, and I just couldn't put it down. It was so wonderful. The writing was so wonderful, and it was so funny, everything that I would want in a book to read. And then breakfast finished, and we had to go up to our room. So my husband quietly appropriated the book as if he'd always had it in his hand, and his intention was to just keep it, and then he would be reading it, and it would be gone from me. So I put my hand on the book. I said, no, I know what you're doing. You're taking the book away. We are going to share this book. So in our family, he reads different books generally, and I read different books, but I think this is a book that we are going to fight over and read together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm very moved
Days of the China Dragon.
Days of My China Dragon. It's a book set in a restaurant.
Yes.
And I'm very moved by that. I'm very grateful as well. And I have to say, much of what I've learned, perhaps a little bit late in life, but much of what I've learned about how to be a human being, even how to write, has been in the kitchen. And one of the presences in my kitchen has always been you. And in a way, as one writer to another, it seems to me that you live in the warmest spaces possible. Your books are in people's kitchens, and you are in people's hearts. So perhaps we should all stand up to give a standing ovation to one of our greatest... It's been an absolute pleasure. Madhur will be signing copies of her book right back in the tent over there now. So if you had some questions, I know there were hundreds of you who wanted to ask them. You will have to ask them to her there. Madhur, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We wish to thank Madhur Jaffrey, Chandrahas Choudhury, and UFO Movies for this very enriching and gripping session. Do note that the author will be available to sign her books at the book signing desk located right at the entrance of Charbagh. If you could please fall in line to interact with her and get your books signed, it would be really nice. The festival brochure and flyer with the full program are available for purchase at the JCB Prize for Literature bookshop managed by Full Circle. You can also grab a copy of your favorite book while you're there. Please help us in keeping the venue clean and dispose any waste items in the bins placed all across the palace. The next session at Charbagh is session number 93, We That Are Young. It would begin shortly. We request the audience to kindly occupy the front rows first. Thank you. Somebody is sitting. Is someone sitting? And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for you to win something. So one of you lucky members in the audience is sitting on the Zomato hot seat. Oh, we have her already. Please bring your sticker along with you to claim your prize. We have a goodie bag from Zomato waiting for you. Can we have a round of applause for our lucky winner?